These two marquee signs behind me were made in a roughly similar fashion, but they're very different in terms of how they got put together. In fact, it's probably best to show you how I made them with these two little mock-ups right here. Watch.
And I hope you do watch, because both techniques are on display here. Can you tell which one is which?
So to the naked eye, these two techniques are going to look pretty similar, but they're very different in how they appear at the end result and also in the technique that you use to build them. The first one is some open holes. Now, those diameters of those holes are just a little bit bigger than the Christmas lights. You're going to see here, if I turn a can of air duster upside down, out comes essentially what is like liquid nitrogen, and it makes the hot glue, well, not dry, but I guess it would cool extremely fast. This is the first technique. I had to hold each one in place, put the glue down, and then make it cool. It is an absolute mess. And at this point, you can see the housing that the bulbs are in, and it does the job okay. Now, with that technique done, I'm going to show you the other one. It involves an extra step where you take smaller diameter holes that are the diameter of the bulbs themselves, and those are preceded by the holes that are actually the housings for the Christmas lights. But this time, I decided to really hone in on the diameter here. Now, it's not 100% consistent, but it's pretty close. And now you can see there is no hot glue needed, and everything just kind of clicks into place. This process took probably 500% less time than the initial hot glue technique and was not such a cumbersome pain in the butt to do. Looks pretty good, right? More on that in just a second. And so here they are. The one on the right, you can definitely see more of the Christmas light through it. The one on the left, well, hides the housing and just gives you the bulb. Which one looks better in your opinion? Now, of course, you can make these by hand. Stencil them out yourself, use the proper drill bits, but I got the do, man. And I'm going to use my machines. You don't like it? Write something. Well, of course, I say that in jest, but if you're going to say something negative about any type of digital fab, do it respectfully. That's all I ask. I'm going to go into Lightburn and I'm going to sketch out a candy cane. This was pretty easy to draw up. And instead of making the frame around it in one continuous piece, that would waste a lot of wood, I am going to make some of them that way, but the others I did not. You'll see me assemble this in just a second. This wood I'm using is a true 1/4 inch by GARNICA. I mentioned them in my last video about having an outdoor plywood that lasts 15 years. Well, they've done it here again with some wood that honestly feels like it was specifically made for a laser cutter. It's a true 1/4 inch, it cuts like a dream, and it's the strongest 1/4 inch wood that I've ever used. Now, for more information about this, check the website description. I do sell panels of this wood in various sizes for CO2 lasers, so if you got one yourself and you want to check it out, the link will be down below. So back to the construction of this. This is the underside or the backside where the lights are going to be input, and what's facing the table is where the lights are going to come out of. I'm layering essentially all of these strips of 1/4 inch wood instead of doing a continuous frame around the entire candy cane here, which I will do in the front. I didn't feel like it was necessary in the back because, well, one, you can nest these pieces onto your cutting surface and you don't waste nearly as much wood. Another thing is you're never really going to be staring at the back of this, and to have a segmented frame to build it up in the back shouldn't be a problem. We're going to try to mitigate that with some dust and some glue, the gaps, maybe some paint, but the front, you can see, I was not going to segment this because I just wanted it to be one continuous piece for aesthetic reasons, as you could tell. Now, this layering effect of these frames on the bottom and the top kind of give it that cool kind of feel. That kind of marquee-esque sign, if you will. This isn't technically a marquee because I believe those are used in mostly businesses and or for advertising or displaying messages. A lot of times they're with lights like we're doing here, but I think the intent is more for to communicate things instead of necessarily just make something decorative like I'm doing. So we have 4 layers coming off the back and 2 layers coming off the front of this true 1/4 inch plywood. And once that's all glued together, I've gone ahead and taken the liberty to do an 1/8 inch round over the whole thing. Now here's that technique of mixing up some sawdust and some glue I was telling you about earlier. There was a pretty big gap there. Not really sure where it came from. I guess I didn't account for the kerf of the laser. Maybe that was it. Who knows? Either way, or maybe I just didn't install it correctly. We fixed it and we're moving on to paint. So my first inclination was to use Rust-Oleum or rattle can enamel spray paint. You know, the stuff you just get it anywhere really. And it turns out that that worked okay. It didn't work great. Reason being is there are some lines in the inner part of this that are still really dark. The edge of the burned wood is just soaking up. This is 2 coats and it just still looks kind of horrible. So I decided to purchase some enamel that is in a little can this way, and we're gonna go ahead and brush it on. And this technique
proved to be a better technique for sure, as you can see. And of course, with any paint job, it's always best to do lighter coats and to do more of them. And I did sand in between some of these, so just take your time here if you're going to do this, at least on the edges of plywood like this, and go ahead and use your paint if you want to go ahead and kind of fill those gaps. Turns out that it works. And of course, that single line I just covered could have been made differently by overlapping those pieces with different measurements, but I didn't think into it that far, and that's what I got. Now it's on to the Christmas lights. Now I'm realizing that the plugs themselves are, well, they need to be shortened a little bit because I didn't leave enough room for those to be encapsulated into the sign. There is going to be a back on this sign. That way it doesn't show all the ugly wires. So I'm going to sand them down and cut them off as best I can, and that's about what I need. Okay, now it's time to string up our lights, and I remembered that I should have planned for this, but I didn't. We need a spot for the lights to go. The cord needs to get into the structure somehow if we're going to encapsulate the back. So a little step bit and a multi-tool, and we're good to go. So here is the beginning of an arduous process for me. These holes, I measured with a caliper, and I didn't want them to be too tight because I didn't want to break the bulbs. I didn't want to have any issues. Well, the issue was that I made them just a skosh too loose. Using this hot glue does take a minute for this hot glue to actually, unheat itself. I guess that would be cool down. The word for unheat would be cool down. And for it to kind of become rigid. So this is the aha moment where I used a can of compressed air turned upside down, and then really cold compressed liquid comes out, almost like liquid nitrogen like I mentioned earlier. But here we go. This process took hours, I'm not going to lie. And I thought, in the end it'll be worth it. And I was pretty happy with the result, quite frankly. And the idea was to go every other line, white, red, just like a standard candy cane. And here you can see the inner workings of the back. And again, I think I'm on like about 2 hours doing this. And finally, I'm at a place where I can kind of look at it and flip it over. But before we do that, let's go to the table saw and cut down some spacer blocks because I need something for the back to be able to screw into. So that's what we're doing. So the back portion of this is going to be made from 1/8 inch plywood, really thin stuff. You don't need to go too crazy here, but it does need a place to kind of grab onto. So these are going to be just simply glued right in place at just random areas all along the perimeter of the back. And you'll see shortly here what I'm talking about, how I'm going to attach this thing. I did go back over to the laser and cut this piece of really thin material out, and it has a little bit of a relief, meaning that these lights are incandescent still and they're creating just a little bit of heat. So there's that kind of gap around everything to kind of let some of that heat out. And it's looking pretty good if I do say so myself. Now it's time to hang it up. We have a series of 3 small sheds in our backyard. One's where I do all my shipping out of. This one houses our well. It's called our pump house. And I figured it would go on this one. Why not? So we're going to attach a piece of cleat material. Of course, it's going to be a French cleat. And then boom, check that out. Now, I'm going to share a pretty personal moment here. I'm installing the cord, and it's between me and my son. Check it out.
What
What are you saying?
You
You want to go to bed? You're cute, dude. Can you wait till I do this one? Yeah? So here's a true glimpse inside. Yeah, the candy cane looks cool, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But my son doesn't say much. Let's just put it that way. And the fact that he says things like, "Time to go to bed, buddy." Well, the reason he says buddy so much is because that's what we've always said. Do you want something to drink, buddy? Do you want to go to bed, buddy? And so when he wants something, a lot of times he'll murmur what he hears us say. Okay, so that's kind of cool, man. It's cool to see those developments. Anyway, enough about that whole personal thing. Let's go ahead and design another sign because I think there's another technique that I can use that's going to be even better. And you know what it is. So we decided to make a sign that says Merry Christmas in the shape of a ticket or a tag that you might have hanging off of your presents. And of course, this is going to require, well, a lot of glue, a lot of clamps, and basically I'm not going to go over the same process, but what we're doing here is we're layering up, again, more plywood
And we're going to do it in roughly the same manner, but the one fundamental difference is going to be that this one's lights are going to be protruding out exactly the diameter hole it needs just to show the light itself, like I showed you in that previous example. And of course, this one says a phrase or a statement. Merry Christmas is what it says. It doesn't just have lines to represent a candy cane. So there's a bit more riding on the accuracy of this, and that's what I'm hoping to achieve here. All right, a few hours go by, the clamps are off, and I've cut one more frame for the back, but this time I had the presence of mind to leave a gap, and that's where the cord is going to run through. So instead of sanding the sides forever, I'm just going to cut off the burn marks with the table saw. I figured that'd be a little easier to do. Couldn't necessarily do that with the candy cane, but I can definitely do it with a shape like this. And it works so much faster. My goodness. Of course, you got to be safe. Cut these kind of longer pieces on a crosscut sled. And we're going to attach a trim router to a clamp, to another clamp, to a base to make my really fancy router table here. This is a 3/16 of an inch round over bit, and that's what we're going to put over the entire sign. Now, these pesky corners, well, you ever heard of a sanding sponge? I actually made this myself. This is a couple of bolts and a bunch of sandpaper I actually cut up on the laser to put into this little thing, and it works pretty well too. And here is the installation of the fundamental difference of these two designs. This is the smaller diameter hole plate that I'm going to install right in front of the other one. And that's going to give us, well, you're going to see how much easier this is to do. Once this is in place with a bunch of glue, and I'm using some CA glue around the edges to kind of tack it all in place, kind of as clamps, we're going to caulk the edge. This is some fast drying stuff. Got this from Sherwin-Williams. It claims 20 minutes, and then you can paint it, which I've never seen 20 minutes. I've only ever seen 30 minutes, so good job on the extra 10-minute time savings. Not sure if I really used it, but it worked out all right. So instead of using a rattle can enamel this time, I'm going to go ahead and use just outdoor latex paint. Going to use the blue tape trick so I don't get paint in the crevasses of the interior can. And we're going to go ahead and paint this with a brush. Multiple coats, I think about 3. And in between the second and third coat, I did a light sanding. And there was some paint that got into these holes. And I tried to go really, really thin on the top. And I just wasn't able to keep it out of the holes as best I could. It wasn't really hard. I took an ice pick or a small drill on maybe 20 of the holes during installation. You'll see that in a minute. But this process went pretty well. Like I said before, a little bit of a sanding in between the second and third coats, but that third coat was the final one. Turned out pretty nice. So with all the experience I have with plywood, I know that veneer, well, it can kind of get dislodged and splinter on you if you're ever pushing something with a tolerance this tight. So I was afraid that the light would come through and then the veneer would pop out. So I took a counterbore or a countersink, whatever you want to call it. I was corrected in my last video on what it was. And I don't even remember what it was. So either way, it worked out pretty well. Not that big a deal. But look at this process. No hot glue, no nothing. Just be very careful with your measurements and pop them all in place. And honestly, it just kind of snaps in. There was the ice pick there. Again, I sped this up really quickly, but you can see that I'm kind of just going about my business, toting along. Now, instead of taking about 2 hours, this only took about 20 minutes. And as I go through, the red is at the bottom and the white is going to be at the top. And yeah, this was a really satisfying process too, because one thing I knew about the first one was that I needed to do something different. And that was kind of the key of this project. I wasn't necessarily going to film this, but I'm glad I did, because a whole nother sign came out of it, or another experience for me to get better at something. And that's kind of the main goal sometimes with you being in the garage and tinkering around and doing something you've never done before. And yeah, but there is something funny about this sign. It's that it almost looks like a kid drew it. More on that in a minute. But I need to put an 1/8 inch backer on this. So I'm going to put down a sample piece of that wood. We're going to take our calipers and we're going to take a measurement of how exactly deep the blocks are going to need to be to install this back. I take that same measurement and I transfer it over to the table saw. And lo and behold, I had some get off your high horse. I have hardwood around. Is that mahogany? I know people watching are thinking, what is hardwood even doing in my shop? All kidding aside, I have some hardwood. Okay, I'm not opposed to having it. I like plywood better. All right, sue me. All right, so here are these blocks of mahogany being glued in place all the way around the perimeter, plus a little bit more of a substantial block in the middle. Now, these cords are kind of a pain because they're in these massive clusters and they're kind of hard to push down, but I think we're going to be okay. Going over to the Thunder Laser here, we're going to pick out this piece of 1/8" birch plywood. Going to go ahead and use this as the backer. Now, let me tell you, this laser, I picked this up about 6 months ago to help with the business, and it has been, wow, it's been incredible, quite frankly. It's really awesome because it just works. I have not had to adjust it since I've installed it, and there's a lot to say about that, about a laser cutter. So here's the beauty of this process of putting the back on the sign. It gets rid of a lot of visual chaos. There's a ton going on under here, and just to get rid of it all and to use these countersunk screws to make everything nice and flush, it's like you got a final product right at your fingertips in a matter of minutes. Although it did take me a few hours / days to make these, it's just a really cool process. Now, to hang it on the wall, like I said, nothing short of a freedom cleat or a French cleat. By the way, I'm not going to type it here. If you're just listening to me talk right now and you go to freedomcleats.com, look and see what happens.
So upon installing these, I had my wife come out, and she goes, the candy cane's cool. Of course, that's the one I fumbled my way through. She goes, the Merry Christmas, well, that's straight up light bright. She's not wrong. One thing I didn't realize was going to happen is that when you get really close to the Merry Christmas sign, it almost looks like a kid drew it. It's hard to kind of make lettering with lights that you're limited to the quantity. I only had 100 per strand. That was kind of what I wanted to use. I didn't want to go crazy with this. Anyway, it looks good from afar, but it's far from looking good, all right? If that makes any sense. But the candy cane turned out dope. I mean, it's so cool. And that's the one that I just kind of felt I was a failure on. Isn't that funny how things work that way? Interesting, huh?
You know, and quite frankly, I've gotten used to these lights being here. It's actually quite the nice feel on the patio. I might have to do something seasonally in this area of the house. So stay tuned. Hope you like this one. See y'all next time.